They told him not to look into any mirror after midnight. One rule. That's all Gray's Hollow asked. But travel blogger Carter Monroe couldn't resist temptation. Now, people are vanishing. Reflections are fading. And a pale figure with black eyes is stepping out of the glass. Bloody Mary herself. The town has lived under a cursed pact for generations. But Carter's mistake has unleashed something ancient and hungry. Can he fix what he's broken? Or is he just another face soon to disappear from every mirror forever? Break the rule. And she breaks through. No mirrors. After midnight isn't just a ghost story, it's a warning. In a forgotten town tucked deep in the hills, there's one unbreakable rule. No mirrors after the clock strikes 12. For the locals, it's a quiet agreement, a survival pact with something they don't dare name. But for Carter Monroe, a cocky travel blogger chasing internet fame, it's just another town quirk to ignore. He came looking for content. What he found was a town frozen in fear, living under the shadow of a legend long believed to be folklore. Bloody Mary. But this Mary doesn't just haunt mirrors. She owns them. Every reflection is her doorway. And once Carter breaks the rule, there's no turning back. Now, as the power flickers and the streets fall silent, Mary returns, feeding on broken promises and forgotten oaths. People vanish without a trace. Their reflections fade first. The final mirror stands untouched in the town hall. For now. The only way to stop her? Face her. And that means Carter must give up more than just his pride. This story isn't about summoning a ghost. It's about waking up a god. Story number 1. Samantha Griggs stood in front of the bathroom mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she traced the edges of the glass. The silence of the room seemed to press down on her, thick and suffocating. Her reflection stared back, pale and tired, much like the girl she used to be, before her sister, Lila, died. It had been a year today, and the grief still clung to her like a second skin, invisible but always there. The ritual had always fascinated her. It was a game, no, a dare, something kids did when they were bored, when they needed a thrill. But for Samantha, tonight felt different. It wasn't a dare. It wasn't some silly superstition. It was something desperate. Something she thought might bring her closer to Lila. Maybe even allow her to talk to her again. She had read about the Bloody Mary legend, about how a girl named Mary was wronged in life, her childhood stolen from her by a cruel, neglectful father, and how she became a spirit, trapped in the reflection of mirrors, forever longing for the innocence she had lost. Samantha felt a strange pull toward her. Maybe she could ask Mary. Ask her what had happened, why Lila had to die. Maybe, just maybe, she could get the answers she couldn't find anywhere else. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. She closed her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. Nothing happened. She opened her eyes again and looked into the mirror. The room was still, the reflection of the bathroom so familiar, so mundane. But then the air shifted. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled. There, in the mirror, something was moving. A flicker of movement, like the image of a child, running through the foggy glass. Her breath caught in her throat, and then the image stopped. A small, pale face stared back at her, eyes wide with a mixture of sorrow and something darker, something hungry. Samantha's pulse quickened. It was Mary. But it wasn't right. The girl in the mirror wasn't just any ghost. There was something wrong about her. something twisted. The eyes of the child reflected no innocence, only pain and anger, as if the little girl had been tortured, her soul bound to the glass for years. "Help me," the voice echoed, barely a whisper, but it felt as if the words were etched into her mind. "He won't let me go." Samantha froze. The air felt colder now, sharp and biting. The temperature of the room dropped and she could see her breath fogging in the mirror. She blinked, and the reflection of the child was gone, replaced by her own face once more. Her heart pounded as she stepped back. "Samantha, you okay?" A voice called from the other side of the door. It was Elliot, her best friend, his voice laced with concern. She barely heard him. Her mind raced, her thoughts tangled. The words that Mary had spoken, they weren't the ones she had expected. This wasn't just about a lost childhood. There was something more, something darker. Elliot knocked again. "Sam?" She snapped out of her trance. "I'm fine," she muttered, voice shaking as she wiped her damp hands on her jeans. Just give me a second." But the second she turned away, something caught her eye in the mirror again. A series of strange, jagged drawings appearing out of nowhere. They were rough, childlike sketches, like someone had drawn them in a hurry. And they weren't random. They were scenes. Her sister's death, the car crash, Lila's blood on the pavement. "Sam, open the door," Elliot shouted, panic in his voice now. The images in the mirror twisted, and Samantha felt her breath catch again. Something was coming. Something that wasn't just tied to Mary. There was another presence, one that lingered beneath her, unseen, suffocating. A shadow loomed at the edges of her reflection, darker than the dim light of the bathroom. It wasn't Mary, it was her father. Samantha gasped as the realization hit her like a blow to the chest. The man who had hurt Mary, the man who had stolen. Her childhood wasn't gone. He was here. He had never left. And somehow he was using Mary to get to her, to torment her, to make her suffer in ways she couldn't understand. Mary's spirit, trapped and tortured by her father's cruelty, was bound to the mirrors. But now, she was no longer just a victim. She was a weapon. "Sam!" Elliot's voice broke through again, his hand banging on the door. "What's going on?" Samantha swallowed hard, a bitter taste of fear filling her mouth. She had to stop this. But how? How could she stop a spirit bound by rage and manipulation? How could she survive when her very reflection betrayed her? And then she saw it. A small figure in the corner of the mirror. A child's hand, smeared with blood, reaching out to her. It was Mary. No, it wasn't just Mary. It was Mary's father, using her as a pawn. Samantha wasn't just facing the ghost of a dead child. She was facing the lingering evil of a man who had never known love, only hatred. The man who had turned Mary into a monster. Her heart pounded as she turned to face the door. "Elliot, get out of here!" she screamed, but the voice that came out of her mouth wasn't hers. It was Mary's. The door creaked open. Elliot stepped in, eyes wide with confusion. "Sam, you don't look." Before he could finish, the reflection in the mirror twisted again. The child's face morphed, and now, it wasn't just a child's face. It was a woman's. A woman who looked exactly like Samantha. Her reflection grinned back at her, a wicked, cruel smile that didn't belong to her. Samantha's stomach dropped. The mirror was no longer showing just Mary or her father. It was showing her. But it wasn't. Her, was it? It was the part of her she didn't know was there. The part of her that was tied to Mary's tragic fate. The truth hit her hard. She wasn't just seeing Mary's past, she was living it. She was Mary's younger sister, reincarnated. Her death, Lila's death, had been no accident. It was part of a cycle of pain and suffering passed down through the years. And now, the only way to break it was to free Mary's spirit once and for all. Samantha turned back to the mirror. She knew what she had to do. She closed her eyes. The room spun as she stepped forward, her body starting to fade, becoming part of the reflection. A scream echoed in her ears as her reflection took on a life of its own. The last thing she saw before everything went dark was the cruel smile of her reflection. And then, nothing. But when she awoke, she was somewhere else. A place of cold darkness where time didn't seem to move, and Mary was there, standing in front of her, no longer a vengeful spirit, but a lost, terrified child. "I'm sorry," Samantha whispered. "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand." The two of them stood in the dark, and as Samantha reached out to take Mary's hand, the air around them seemed to shift. Mary's eyes softened, the anger melting away. But back in the real world, a mirror hung in the bathroom, and in it, Samantha's reflection smiled. It smiled when she wasn't smiling. It grinned, as though it knew something she didn't, and somewhere in the darkness, the spirit of Mary's father watched, waiting. Story number 2. The lights in the room flickered like they were trying to tell Devin Lee something. But Devin, ever the prankster, didn't pay much attention. He was too busy staring at the glowing red circle on the camera screen, counting down the seconds before they'd make history. Again. "All right, guys," Devin said, flashing a quick, half-sarcastic grin at the camera. "This is gonna blow up on TikTok. 3 words, 3 times. That's all it takes." Jess rolled her eyes, but didn't say anything. She'd long since given up on trying to talk sense into Devin. After all, they'd been through this before. "Dev, just make sure you don't get us into real trouble this time, okay?" she said, crossing her arms, her face showing traces of the old affection that used to exist between them. Yeah, Devin replied. "It's just a stupid urban legend. What's the worst that could happen?" "Famous last words," Jess muttered under her breath. Marco, the adrenaline junkie who couldn't resist a viral trend, clapped his hands and grinned at the camera. "Let's get this over with. This'll be legendary." The 3 of them were sitting in the dimly lit old dorm room that had once been a storage closet. The mirrors that lined the walls gave the place an eerie vibe, but Devin was too busy adjusting the camera to care. The internet had been flooded with the latest trend, performing the Bloody Mary ritual 3 times to summon the spirit. No one truly believed it worked, but Devin was all about the views. And Marco? Marco just wanted clout. "You know the drill," Marco said as he leaned in front of the mirror, his face serious. 3 times. 3 souls. "I'll go first," Devin said, winking at the camera. 3 words. 3 times. Here goes. He leaned closer to the mirror and said, almost mockingly, "Bloody Mary." Jess sighed. "You don't have to." "Shh," Devin cut her off. He was already in the zone. "Bloody Mary." The 3rd time his voice wavered, but only for a moment. Bloody Mary. The air in the room shifted. It got colder and the lights flickered again. Jess shivered. "Okay, Devin, that's enough." But when they turned to look at the mirror, Devin froze. The reflection wasn't right. At first, it was just a flicker. Then the figure of a woman appeared in the mirror, her face pale and twisted, her eyes black voids. She was smiling, but it wasn't the smile of a normal person. It was twisted, almost like she was mocking them. Jess stepped back. "Devin, what did you do?" Before he could respond, the mirror seemed to suck in the room's light, darkening everything. The figure in the mirror didn't move, but the air in the room felt heavy, pressing against them, suffocating. Something was wrong, horribly wrong. Marco stepped forward, laughing nervously. "Come on, guys, it's just some effects. From the camera, right? A trick of the light?" But the reflection in the mirror began to change. First, the woman's face split, half in a grin, half in a sorrowful frown. Her eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to pull at the very heart of the room. Jess recoiled. That's not just a prank." And then, as if on cue, something else happened. The woman in the mirror, the thing that wasn't quite Mary, reached out her hand, palm pressed against the glass. Marco yelled, stumbling backward, his foot catching on a chair. I told you not to do this." And just like that, Marco was gone. One moment, he was there. The next, nothing. Not a scream, not a trace, just silence. Jess's breath caught in her throat. "Marco! Marco!" She rushed to the mirror, pounding her fists against the glass. "No! No! No! No!" The woman's form twisted again, this time into a grotesque, writhing mass. 3 faces emerged from it, each one distinct, yet undeniably the same. One face was twisted in rage, contorted and filled with fury. Another face was consumed with sorrow, tears streaking down its cheeks. And the third face was filled with envy, eyes burning, lips twisted in a snarl. Devin's voice was shaky now. "What the hell is happening?" Jess pulled him away from the mirror, her eyes wide. "We have to get out of here, Devin. This isn't a joke." But Devin, ever the skeptic, stood his ground. "No. Wait. We have to figure this out. We can't just leave Marco there." I don't care about him," Jess snapped. "We're next. Don't you get it?" Suddenly, Devin's phone rang. He pulled it from his pocket, but when he answered, the voice on the other end wasn't who he expected. "Devin. Devin Lee." The voice rasped, low and eerie. "You don't remember me, but I remember you." Devin froze, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. Who is this?" There was a long pause before the voice spoke again. "I'm Mary, and I'm waiting for you." The room seemed to darken even more. The mirrors that lined the walls began to ripple, their surfaces distorting like water, like the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. And from each mirror, a new version of Mary emerged, each one more terrifying than the last. Jess screamed, turning and running for the door, but the room wouldn't let her leave. The door slammed shut, trapping them inside. And as she turned, she saw something horrifying. A 4th Mary had appeared, a reflection of herself. "No!" Jess shouted, backing away. But the reflection was already moving, her eyes gleaming with malicious intent. In the chaos, Devin finally realized what he had done. The ritual wasn't just about summoning Mary. It was about trapping souls. 3 souls. His soul, Jess's soul, Marco's soul. They had each been taken, each trapped, in one of the mirrors, each a different version of Mary. Mary wasn't one spirit. She was a fractured trauma, a representation of rage, sorrow, and envy from parallel timelines, each one pulling the victims into her twisted domain. I didn't mean for this," Devon muttered, his face pale with fear. He could feel something darker moving behind him, something worse than he had ever imagined. The door wouldn't open. The room began to close in around them. The walls seemed to breathe, and then, just as he thought he was going to be swallowed whole, Jess turned to Disu. "Him!" "Devon," she said, her voice low and trembling. "You're a descendant of her. You're the one she's been waiting for." Before he could react, Jess vanished. One moment, she was standing there. The next, her scream echoed in the air, fading into nothingness. Devon stared at the mirror in front of him. There, a new reflection of Mary stared back, grinning wildly, her eyes filled with a madness that made Devon's blood run cold. The mirrors cracked, splintering like glass breaking under pressure. And then, just as everything went dark, Devon made a desperate choice. He reached out and touched the shards of glass, feeling them sink into his chest. When he opened his eyes again, the room was empty. The mirrors were gone. But the reflection, it was still there. And Mary watched from within. Story number 3. Nia Brooks had seen her fair share of oddities in her years as an investigative blogger. She had written about haunted houses, cursed objects, and ghost stories that seemed too far-fetched to believe. But when she stumbled across the antique mirror at a small estate sale in an old, forgotten corner of a sleepy town, she couldn't resist. The mirror, framed in tarnished silver, was beautiful, its surface cloudy with age, but it held something unsettling, a whisper of something that begged to be understood. Think it's worth anything. Caleb, the mirror restorer who had been quietly observing her, asked as she ran her fingers along the edge of the glass. Nia glanced up at him. Caleb was a few years older, with deep-set eyes and a nervous energy about him, as if he knew something he wasn't saying. He worked in his grandfather's shop, restoring old antiques, but something about his presence unsettled Nia. He looked like a man haunted by memories, maybe even regret. Still, she hadn't come here to get a read on the guy. She came for the mirror. "Doesn't matter," she said with a shrug. "I'll write about it. That's worth more than anything." The price was cheap enough, a bargain, really. For any object so old and worn, it had an undeniable allure. Nia wrapped it carefully in a blanket and placed it in the trunk of her car, already imagining the blog post she'd write about its history. She didn't believe in the supernatural, not truly. Ghosts and spirits were nothing more than stories, until she wasn't so sure anymore. That night, after a long day of work and writing, Nia sat in front of the mirror in her cramped apartment. The low hum of her laptop filled the otherwise quiet room, but she was too focused on the glass to notice much else. The mirror reflected her, yes, but it also held something darker. She couldn't help it. The urge was irresistible, the curiosity gnawing at her like a persistent itch. She had heard the urban legend of Bloody Mary as a child, of course. Every kid had. But it was just a story, just a game. She had never believed it, not really. Until now. "Bloody Mary," she whispered, almost mocking the old rhyme. She stared into the glass, challenging the darkness that lingered at the edges of her reflection. "Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary." She said it again. The words colder, the air around her suddenly chill. For a moment, nothing happened. Just the normal reflection, her own face staring back at her. Then the lights flickered. She could feel the temperature in the room drop. Nia smirked, shaking her head. "This is ridiculous." But before she could turn away, something shifted in the mirror. A figure. It wasn't her. The woman had pale skin, her eyes wide and full of despair. Her mouth stretched in a twisted, painful smile. The woman's hair was long, dark, and wild, as if tangled by something far worse than time. "Don't look away," the woman's lips whispered, though Nia hadn't heard her speak. Nia's heart skipped a beat. Her breath caught in her throat. "No," she muttered. "This is just a trick of the light. I'm imagining this." But the figure in the mirror didn't vanish. Instead, the woman's reflection reached out, her fingers pressing against the glass, leaving streaks of coldness that Nia could feel even from where she sat. She stood up, taking a step backward. Then it hit her, a realization, sudden and sharp. The figure wasn't just there. The mirror was alive. It was feeding off her fear. Nia backed away, her head spinning. The glass seemed to ripple, to shimmer as though it had depth, as if it could pull her in. Her laptop screen blinked, and Nia turned her attention back to it. Her fingers hovered over the keys as she saw the reflection of the woman's face appear on the screen. The same twisted smile, the same dark, sorrowful eyes. "Bloody Mary?" Nia whispered, her voice shaking now. The woman in the mirror opened her mouth wider, and Nia could almost hear a scream rising from the depths of the glass. And then, nothing. The figure was gone. But that wasn't the worst part. Nia blinked, and the reflection she saw wasn't hers anymore. It was of someone else, a version of herself, with darker eyes and a twisted smile. She froze, staring at it. This wasn't a trick of the light. This wasn't her imagination. The mirror held a piece of her soul, a piece of anyone who dared look. Too long. Nia didn't sleep that night. She barely slept at all over the next few days. Every time she glanced into the mirror, something was different. The woman's face would shift, taking on new expressions: rage, sorrow, envy, each more terrifying than the last. The woman wasn't just a ghost, she was a collector, a soul thief. And it seemed now that Nia's soul was already part of the collection. She had to know more. The curiosity that had driven her to purchase the mirror, to research its history, now consumed her. She dug deep, uncovering the dark past of the object. It had changed hands many times, each owner dying under mysterious circumstances. Those who had tried the Bloody Mary ritual were the ones who perished. Each death, captured and replayed, on the mirror's surface had become part of the entity's haunting. But the truth about the mirror was even worse than she could have imagined. The mirror didn't just reflect reality. It stole it. It trapped the souls of those who summoned Bloody Mary, keeping them in a perpetual loop, replaying their deaths over and over again. Nia visited Caleb for answers. She found him at his workshop, hands stained with dust and age-old wax, surrounded by old relics. The mirror was the one thing that stood out, propped up against the wall, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move in the dim light. "You know something, don't you?" Nia demanded, her voice shaking but determined. Caleb didn't look up. He didn't have to. His haunted eyes said it all. "I tried to warn you," he muttered, his voice a rasp. "This mirror isn't just glass. It's a prison. Every time someone says those words, they become part of it." "You're telling me it's alive?" Nia asked, disbelieving. "It feeds off of fear," Caleb explained. "It collects them, the souls of those who summon her. But it doesn't just trap them. It makes them relive their deaths, over and over. And if you keep looking, it starts to pull you in." Nia's chest tightened. She had already seen it, her own death, unfolding slowly, piece by piece in the reflections. Her body, lifeless, her soul, claimed. She had to act fast. That night, as the mirror's whispers began to call her name again, she picked up a hammer. It wasn't a choice, it was a last resort. With a scream of frustration and terror, Nia swung the hammer into the mirror. It cracked, the shards splintering and falling to the floor, the glass shattering into countless pieces. The woman's face screamed, a horrible, twisting sound as if the world itself was being torn apart. And then it was quiet. For a moment, Nia thought she had won. But as she turned away, a sharp pain erupted in her eye. She stumbled, reaching for her face, only to find a shard of the mirror embedded deep into her eye socket. Blood trickled down her cheek, and she could hear the faintest whisper. "I'll never leave you." Nia's breath hitched as she looked into the shards on the floor. They weren't just reflections. They were pieces of her, trapped. And somewhere, deep within the glass, Bloody Mary was smiling. Nia's reflection would never be the same again. Story number 4. Layla Torres had never seen the world. Not in the way other people did. She had been born blind, and that was how she had lived her entire 19 years. But when she was offered the chance to take part in a clinical trial that promised partial vision, she couldn't refuse. She had been through surgeries, therapies, and endless tests over the years, but this was different. This was hope. This was a chance to finally see the world, even if just a little. The procedure was long and complicated, and Dr. Carmichael, the lead specialist, was meticulous. He was professional, always speaking in clinical terms, but there was something in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place. He was hiding something, but she had no reason to question him. Not yet. The moment the bandages were removed from her eyes, the world didn't flood her senses as she had imagined. Instead, there was a blur, like looking through frosted glass. Shapes, colors, nothing sharp, nothing clear. But it was something. At first, she was ecstatic. She could make out outlines of people, their movements. She could see the shapes of trees and buildings, the faint glimmers of light. She had never known this before. The world had never been this close. But that night, as she sat alone in her apartment, she saw something else. In the reflection of the bathroom mirror, a shadow appeared. Layla, still getting used to her new sight, thought it was just a trick of her eyes. Maybe the lights, the shadows, maybe the blur in her vision had made her see things. But then, the shadow moved. A woman. No, not just a woman. A spirit with long dark hair, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a desperate, unearthly sadness. Layla froze. Her heart pounded. "Hello," she whispered, afraid her voice would crack. The woman in the mirror didn't speak, but her eyes, those empty, sorrowful eyes, stared directly at Layla. It was like the spirit was looking at her, really looking, not through the mirror, but into her. She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling. "Help me." Layla couldn't breathe. Who are you?" The woman's reflection faltered, and then, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, the spirit spoke. "I am Mary." Days passed, and the woman appeared every night. Layla had learned a lot about her, mostly through the faint whispers and the way Mary's spirit moved in the mirror. She didn't seem angry like the other ghost stories Layla had heard. No, Mary was different. She was sad, broken, lost. In her conversations with the spirit, Layla learned that Mary's story was tragic. She had been a young woman in the 17th century, accused of witchcraft, framed by her own sister, Eliza. Jealous of Mary's beauty and charm, Eliza had spread lies, convincing the townsfolk that Mary was practicing dark magic. No one had believed Mary when she tried to defend herself, and in the end, she had been executed. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," Mary told Layla one night, her voice full of pain. "I just wanted to live, to be loved." Layla felt the deep sorrow that emanated from the spirit. She wasn't like other ghosts. There was no hunger for revenge. Mary didn't want vengeance. She just wanted justice. Her spirit had been trapped, bound to mirrors, unable to move on, because of the lies Eliza had spread. Her soul was chained to the reflection, unable to find peace. "I was wronged," Mary said, her voice breaking, "and I cannot rest until the truth is known. My sister, she still lives. She still keeps the lies alive." Layla, now able to see enough to navigate the world, couldn't turn away. She couldn't just let the spirit suffer in silence, but she didn't know how to help. Who would believe her? She was just a girl who had barely regained her sight, and the last thing anyone would believe was that she could see ghosts, let alone talk to them. But Layla couldn't ignore Mary. The spirit needed justice, and Layla knew deep down that it was her responsibility to help. She sought out Dr. Carmichael, hoping he could help her understand what was happening. He listened carefully, his brow furrowing as she described her encounters with Mary. After a long silence, he spoke. "Mary," Dr. Carmichael whispered, "wasn't just a spirit. She was something more. She's a soul bound to the mirror, a link between worlds. And you, Layla, you're the key." "The key to what?" she asked, confused. "The vision you regained, it wasn't just medical, it was spiritual. You were chosen to see beyond the veil. You can communicate with Mary because you have a connection to her, one that others don't. But be careful, Layla. The truth you seek is dangerous." That night, as Layla sat before the mirror again, Mary appeared, her face now clearer than ever. She was more than a reflection. She was real, or at least as real as a spirit could be. "Help me," Mary pleaded. "Find her. Confront her." Layla swallowed hard. "How do I do that?" "Bring her to me," Mary said. "Bring Eliza to me. She must answer for the lies she told. She must testify." It took Layla a while to understand, but when the pieces clicked, the plan was clear. To free Mary, she would have to confront the spirit's sister. Eliza had lived for centuries, never acknowledging the wrongs she'd done, but she was still alive, somewhere, and Layla needed to find her. Through long research, Layla learned that Eliza had lived through the years, using dark rituals to stay young and hide her sins. And now, as the last surviving member of her family, Eliza had become a spirit in her own right, a living ghost who still clung to her lies. The ritual court of the dead, Layla realized, was the only way to set Mary free. The dead had their own justice, a court where spirits could testify, where the truth would come out. Layla reached out to Eliza in the mirror, confronting her sister in the spiritual realm. The air grew thick with tension as Eliza appeared in the glass, her face twisted in rage. "You think you can bring me to trial?" Eliza hissed. "You think you can force me to admit the truth?" "I can," Layla said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "Because I know the truth. You killed her. You ruined her life. And now, Mary will be free." In the mirror, Eliza screamed, her figure twisting, warping as the ritual court of the dead formed around them. The spirits of the wronged were there, their eyes glowing with ancient power. Eliza tried to resist, but it was too late. The truth was laid bare. The court judged her, and Eliza's spirit was finally condemned for the lies she had told. As Mary's spirit began to fade, a wave of peace washing over her, she turned to Layla with a grateful smile. "Thank you," Mary whispered. "You've set me free." But the price for justice was steep. As Mary's soul was released, Layla's vision began to fade once again, the light growing dim. The world became blurry, then black. When Layla opened her eyes, she was blind once more. But this time it didn't feel like a curse. It felt like a sacrifice made in the name of truth. And she knew, deep down, that she had done the right thing. She had been Mary's last witness, and now, at last, Mary was at peace. Story number 5. Ivy Blake had never been a believer in superstitions. She had always considered herself practical, grounded, and skeptical of anything that couldn't be explained by science or reason. But then, she arrived at Ashfield Academy, and everything she knew about the world was about to change. The school was old. Old in the way that whispered of long-forgotten secrets, like it was hiding something beneath its polished floors and ivy-covered walls. Ivy didn't think much of it at first, chalking it up to the typical atmosphere of a prestigious boarding school. The kind of place where history seeped through every brick and the air smelled like dust and books. But the moment she set foot on the campus, something felt off. It started with the bathroom. One afternoon, Ivy was wandering the school with Milo, her new best friend. He was the type of guy who wore his confidence like a second skin. Charming, charismatic, and a little reckless. Milo had an energy that made him impossible to ignore. Ivy wasn't sure she liked him at first, but now she couldn't imagine her days without him. They were poking around the older parts of the school, where the halls were darker and the air smelled faintly of mildew. Ivy had overheard the other students talking about a forbidden bathroom in the deepest part of the school, one that was locked up for decades. Naturally, Milo, always up for a challenge, wanted to find it. After much searching, they came, across an old door at the end of a long hallway. The paint had chipped away over the years, revealing the raw wood underneath, and the door was covered with a strange symbol, like a spiral, etched deep into the wood. "This has to be it," Milo said, his grin spreading across his face. "Let's see what's behind door number 1. The door creaked as they pushed it open, revealing a small, dark bathroom. There was something unnervingly cold about the room, as if the air itself didn't want them there. The mirrors were cracked, covered in dust, their edges chipped. Ivy shivered. There was a heaviness in the air that she couldn't quite place. Milo, however, was already moving toward the mirror. "You ever heard of Bloody Mary?" he asked, with a smirk. Ivy frowned. "The urban legend? Yeah. You say her name 3 times and she, appears and kills you or something?" "Or something," Milo said, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "I dare you to try it." Ivy hesitated. She wasn't a believer in ghost stories or myths, but the dare was too tempting. Besides, it would be a good story. They could laugh about it later. "Fine," she said, stepping forward. "I'll do it." Milo stood back, watching her closely as she stared into the cracked mirror. She took a deep breath, her pulse quickening in spite of herself. She could feel the coldness in the air, but she ignored it. This was just a game. "Bloody Mary," she said slowly, staring at her reflection. The room seemed to get even colder, and Ivy felt a shiver run down her spine. But nothing happened. "Bloody Mary," she said again, a little louder this time. The room grew darker, the edges of her reflection blurring. "Bloody Mary," Ivy said, her voice shaking, but she wasn't sure if it was fear or excitement. She looked into the mirror, expecting nothing more than a silly prank to break the tension. But then, something moved in the reflection. At first, Ivy thought it was just her eyes playing tricks on her, but as she stared, she saw a figure. A woman standing in the corner of the mirror. Her face was pale, twisted with an expression of sorrow and rage. Ivy blinked, and the woman was gone. But the cold didn't leave. It lingered. Ivy turned around quickly. "Milo, did you see that?" But Milo wasn't standing behind her anymore. "Where'd you go?" Ivy asked, her voice rising. She searched the small, dimly lit bathroom, but the room was empty. Milo had vanished. The door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang. Ivy rushed to the door, panicking, but it wouldn't budge. She could feel the temperature dropping further, the shadows in the room deepening. She turned to the mirror once more, and that's when she saw it. The reflection of Milo. But it wasn't him. Not exactly. His face was distorted, his eyes blackened, his skin pale. He wasn't smiling anymore. The thing in the mirror was grinning, a grotesque, malicious grin, like it was him. But something was terribly wrong. "Milo," Ivy whispered, her voice trembling. The figure in the mirror nodded slowly. "I'm not Milo anymore," it said, its voice hoarse and unfamiliar. "I'm Mary." Days passed, and one by one, the students at Ashfield Academy began to change. Milo wasn't the only one. At first, it was subtle. A shift in their personalities, a coldness in their eyes. But soon, Ivy realized the terrifying truth. The mirror didn't just kill, it possessed. Each student who dared to perform the ritual became something else, a shell of their former selves. They weren't themselves anymore. They were Mary, pieces of Mary, fragmented personalities, trapped in the mirrors, waiting to reclaim themselves. Ivy couldn't understand it at first. How was it possible? Why was this happening? But as she dug deeper, she uncovered the horrific history of the school. Ashfield Academy wasn't just a school. It had been built on the grounds of an old asylum. And in that asylum, years ago, a young woman named Mary had died. An innocent girl, framed for witchcraft, trapped in the asylum until her tragic death. The mirrors in the school weren't just for reflection. They were gateways to the past, to the spirits of those who had died there. And Mary's spirit had lingered, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what she had lost. Mary wasn't just a ghost. She was a collection of lost souls, fragments of herself, trapped in the mirrors. And the ritual had been the key. Each time a student summoned her, they opened a door, letting a part of her enter their body, making them more like her. Ivy realized that she wasn't just dealing with a haunting. She was dealing with an ancient curse, a broken soul trying to become whole again. And now, there was only one thing left to do. Ivy, determined to stop the madness, broke into the old sealed part of the school, the part no one ever talked about. She found the room, a ritual room filled with old mirrors, each one reflecting her own distorted image, each one a different version of Mary. With a cry of desperation, Ivy began to smash the mirrors one by one. Glass shattered, pieces flying in all directions, and as each mirror broke, the spirits, Mary's spirits, screamed in fury, their voices echoing in the room. But as the last mirror shattered, Ivy looked into the final piece of broken glass at her feet, and she saw her reflection, Mary's reflection. Her eyes were blackened, her smile twisted and malicious. Ivy had done it. She had freed them, but at what cost? Her reflection grinned back at her, and Ivy knew, without a doubt, that she was no longer herself. She was Mary. Story number 6. Eliza Park stood in front of the canvas, the room dimly lit by the soft glow of her desk lamp. She wiped her brow, a mix of sweat and nervous energy. The painting was almost done. Just a few more strokes. She could already feel the tension building in her chest, a weight that had been there ever since the project started. What had begun as an exploration of an old myth was now something far darker. The myth of Bloody Mary had always intrigued her. The idea of a spirit trapped in mirrors calling to the curious was an old tale. But for Eliza, it wasn't just a myth. It was something she felt tied to. The way the legend described Mary, her lost life, her desire for revenge, her anger, it struck a chord with Eliza in ways she couldn't explain. And when her art professor had given the class an open assignment to explore a myth or legend through their work, Eliza had chosen Mary. But she didn't expect it to feel real. The painting itself was haunting. Dark reds, deep blacks, and a ghostly white. She had mixed the paint herself, using a concoction she'd found at a local art supply shop, a special paint made with an ancient recipe. The texture was thick and viscous, almost alive, as though it could breathe. The color was rich, a deep crimson, almost like fresh blood. It gave the painting a depth that made it seem to shimmer, as if Mary's eyes were alive in the canvas, staring at anyone who dared look long enough. When the painting was finished, Eliza had an uneasy feeling settle in her stomach. She couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't right, but she pushed it aside. Art was supposed to make you feel something, wasn't it? The opening night of the art exhibit was packed, and Eliza stood nervously beside her creation. She tried to steady her breathing, but every time someone passed by her painting, she felt their gaze linger just a little too long. Their expressions were strange. Curious at first, but then confused, even unsettled. Her ex-boyfriend, Theo, was there too. He'd broken up with her a few months ago, but they'd stayed on speaking terms. Theo was the kind of guy who liked to stir things up, and as she saw him lingering in front of her painting, she had the feeling he was going to do something reckless. Eliza caught his eye across the room. He smiled at her, but it wasn't the kind of smile that put her at ease. It was a smile full of mischief. Without warning, Theo pulled out his phone, snapped a picture of the painting, and uploaded it to his social media with a caption that read, "Mary is coming for you." He tagged it with young art and creepy, and then set his phone down on the table, clearly proud of himself. "Why would you do that?" Eliza's voice cracked as she walked up to him. "It's just a picture, Eliza. People will eat it up. Maybe it'll go viral," Theo replied with a smirk, not realizing the danger he had just unleashed. But Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. The moment the photo went online, something changed. The air around her seemed to grow heavier, as if the room had taken on a life of its own. The walls seemed to pulse with a low hum, and her mind raced. "Why do you always have to push things too far?" she muttered under her breath, her hand trembling as she reached for the phone. She turned to look at the painting again. For a moment, she thought she saw Mary move, just a flicker, a subtle shift in the way the figure in the painting was positioned. But when she blinked, it was gone. That night, things got strange. The following morning, Eliza received a frantic text from Mira, a classmate who had seen the exhibit. "Eliza, something's wrong. I've been seeing her. I saw Mary. In every reflective surface, the bathroom mirror, my phone screen, everywhere. What did you do? At first, Eliza thought it was just a joke. But then, more messages came. Students, teachers, even the staff at the gallery, everyone who had seen the painting started texting her. Everyone had seen Mary, in mirrors, on windows, in puddles of water. The same thing. A pale, bloodshot face, staring back at them. Her mouth was twisted in an angry, silent scream. "Eliza, you have to fix this," Mira's message read. "You have to destroy the painting. It's cursed." But it was too late. The painting had already begun to spread. The next few days, the hallucinations grew worse. People started to act differently. Their behavior became erratic, like they were being pulled into something they couldn't escape. Some students were found collapsed in front of mirrors, their faces contorted in fear. Others had fallen into comas, their bodies unresponsive, but their eyes wide open, staring into empty spaces. Eliza couldn't ignore it any longer. The curse was real. She rushed to the gallery, hoping to destroy the painting before it could hurt anyone else. But when she arrived, it was already gone. The painting had been sold to a private buyer, a collector who had no idea what he had just purchased. She tried calling the gallery, but the staff told her the painting had already been shipped out. The damage had already been done. Theo. He had posted the picture, and now it was everywhere. It had spread online, circulating through social media, through every phone and computer. It didn't matter where you were. If you looked at the image, you'd see Mary. Eliza knew she had to find a way to stop this before it killed everyone who looked at the painting. But as she sat in her room, her thoughts racing, she realized something that chilled her to the bone. She had painted Mary with blood. The paint she had used, it was made from a rare formula passed down in her family. A family with a long history of strange and unexplainable events. She had thought it was just a way to make her painting stand out. What she didn't know was that the blood had come from somewhere much darker, something ancient. Eliza was a distant descendant of the original Bloody Mary. And now, the curse she had unknowingly tapped into was spreading. Desperate, Eliza decided to burn the painting. She dragged it to the campus bonfire that night, the flames crackling hungrily, as she threw it in, hoping to destroy it once and for all. The moment the painting hit the fire, a scream filled the air, a loud, shrill cry that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. The flames roared higher, but Eliza could feel the heat of the curse still lingering in the air, even as the painting burned to ash. But as the painting was reduced to nothing but smoke and charred remnants, Eliza's phone buzzed. It was a notification. Scan of the painting, the one Theo had uploaded, had gone viral. The image had been downloaded and shared thousands of times, now embedded in millions of devices. It didn't matter that the original painting was gone. The curse had spread. It was in the digital ether now. And somewhere, deep in the reflection of her phone screen, Eliza saw Mary's face. The curse would never be gone. The next day, Eliza disappeared. The last thing anyone saw was a pale, bloodshot reflection of her in a window, her mouth stretched into a twisted grin. And then she was gone. The curse had claimed her too. And as the digital scan of the painting spread across the world, it found new victims, people who would look into their phones, into their mirrors, and see the spirit of Mary, waiting forever. Story number 7. Jaden Knox wasn't scared of much. He'd spent years battling monsters and enemies in virtual worlds, grinding through games until his eyes burned and his fingers cramped. He was good at it too. Competitive, sharp, always, staying ahead of the curve. But when he and his friends stumbled onto the Bloody Mary VR game, everything changed. It was Kyla, the tech genius of the group, who found it. She was the one who tinkered with mods, hacked games, and pushed boundaries no one else dared cross. She found the file in an obscure online forum, something labeled Mirror Game, and decided to try it out. At first, it seemed like just another creepy Halloween-style mod. A VR simulation where players would enter a digital room, look into a mirror, and say, Bloody Mary, 3 times. The game would throw scares at you. Cheap jump scares, distorted faces, eerie whispers. A game meant to be played in the dark with your friends, laughing, screaming, and trying to outlast each other. You in, Jaden? Kyla had asked, her eyes glinting with excitement as she fired up her headset. Jaden had hesitated. He was a gamer through and through, but there was something in Kyla's voice, something different, that made him uneasy. But he didn't want to be the one to back out. Fine, Jaden said, rolling his eyes. Let's do it. Rico, the bravest of the group, grinned. I'm always up for a good scare. He shoved his headset on with enthusiasm. They settled into Kyla's basement, dimly lit by a few scattered LED lights, and put on their headsets. The game loaded, and the familiar virtual room appeared before them. Everything looked fine at first. Polished wood floors, simple furniture, and the kind of minimalist design that only VR games could afford. Then they saw it. The mirror, standing at the center of the room, reflecting the empty space. It was eerie, not because of what it was, but because of how still it was, like it was waiting for something. Jaden, feeling a little foolish, leaned forward. All right, let's get this over with, he said, his voice betraying a hint of nervousness. The 3 of them stood in front of the mirror in the virtual world. Bloody Mary, Kyla said with a smirk, already preparing for the jump scare. Bloody Mary, Rico added, practically daring the game to do its worst. Bloody Mary, Jaden finished, his voice steady. They all chuckled, waiting for the game's usual cheap thrills. But something was different this time. Instead of the expected glitch or scare, the game grew silent. The mirror reflected them for a moment longer than it should have, before the glass rippled like water disturbed by a stone. Then, everything went dark. The game abruptly ended, and they found themselves back in the real world. But something felt off. Jaden's heart was racing, his pulse thumping in his ears. He pulled off his headset, feeling a cold sweat gathering on his neck. What the hell? Kyla muttered, equally confused. That wasn't supposed to happen. I thought it was just a mod, Jaden said, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping into his mind. It was supposed to end once He trailed off as he looked around the room. It was the same basement they had been in before, but there was a strange unease hanging in the air. The shadows seemed deeper, the lights a little dimmer, as if the room itself had become heavier. All right, maybe we messed with something we shouldn't have, Rico said, but his usual bravado was gone. Let's just call it a night. They all agreed, but as they went their separate ways, Jaden couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them, something that had crossed over with them from the game. That night, as Jaden lay in his bed, his mind raced. The memory of the game kept replaying in his mind. The mirror, the ripples, the feeling of something watching. He tried to close his eyes, but sleep didn't come. Instead, he heard whispers. Quiet at first, barely a breath, but then louder, insistent. Jaden. He sat up, his heart thundering in his chest. The room was dark, But something was different. His reflection in the mirror on his dresser was wrong. The face staring back at him was distorted, its eyes wide with terror, its mouth stretched into a grin that shouldn't have been there. He jumped out of bed, but when he turned to look, again, the reflection was normal again. He was panting, his heart racing. Was it a hallucination? A trick of his tired mind? The next morning, Rico didn't show up for their usual meetup. When Jaden texted him, there was no reply. That night, they all gathered again at Kyla's house. Something was wrong, and they all knew it. Rico had gone silent, his phone inactive. "I went to his place this morning," Kyla said, her voice low. "His mom said he hasn't been home since last night." Jaden's stomach dropped. What the hell is going on? That night, the game didn't stop. It followed them. Each time they went to sleep, they woke up in a darker, more distorted version of their rooms. The air was colder. The walls seemed to close in. And the reflection in every mirror, whether it was a bathroom mirror, a window, or even the screen of their phones, was always the same. Mary. But this time, it wasn't just a reflection. Mary wasn't just in the mirrors. She was with them. The days blurred into nights as Jaden, Kyla, and the others tried to escape the nightmare. Each time they fell asleep, they woke up to something darker. Their rooms, once familiar, became warped, like the boundaries between the game and reality were eroding. And each time they looked into a mirror, Mary's smile grew wider. I don't know what's happening anymore," Kyla said, her hands shaking as she stared at the reflection of herself, twisted and distorted. "We're trapped. We're in the game." The truth came to them like a punch in the gut. The game wasn't just a game. It was a prison. A digital prison built to contain Mary's spirit. And somehow, by invoking her name, they had freed her, released her from her captivity. And now, she was adapting, following them through every mirror, growing stronger with each passing hour. But it wasn't too late. There was one way out. They just had to stop Mary. They had to trap her. Kyla, the tech genius, got to work. She dug into the corrupted game code, hoping to rewrite it, to trap Mary once again. But with each change, the game fought back. It adapted. The mirror in front of them began to show Jaden's face, but his eyes were hollow, his mouth wide and smiling. Jaden knew what he had to do. They gathered around the computer, all of them exhausted and scared, as Kyla typed furiously. But before they could finish the code, Rico, who had been silent for days, appeared in the mirror behind them. His face was twisted and deformed, a horrible reflection of the person he used to be. "Rico," Jaden whispered, horrified. The reflection of Rico didn't speak. It only grinned. With a final push, Kyla hit the enter key, and the screen flickered. The game froze, and the mirror shattered. But when Jaden picked up his phone later that night, a notification popped up on the screen. A picture, a new scan of the game, uploaded by an anonymous user. It was viral. Mary's whisper came from the phone, quiet but persistent. "I'm still here," and Jaden knew, deep in his gut, that they hadn't won. Not really. Story number 8. Dana Wells stood at the edge of the burned estate, her breath catching in the cold night air. She adjusted the straps on her backpack, feeling the weight of her equipment and the weight of her past failures press on her. The house was gone now, just a pile of charred beams and blackened stones, but there was something about it that called to her, something she couldn't resist. She had made a name for herself as a paranormal investigator, but the last few years had been rough. Too many failed cases. Too many moments where the spirits just wouldn't reveal themselves. Too many times she'd walked away with nothing. But this was different. The estate had burned down years ago, and in the wreckage, 7 mirrors had been found, perfectly intact despite the fire. The rumors had started immediately. Whispers of something other in those mirrors. Something dark. "Do you really think we're going to find anything here, Dana?" Luis, her cameraman and closest friend, asked, his voice steady but carrying a hint of skepticism. He'd been with her through it all, from the ghost hunting to the failed investigations. He never believed, not like Dana did, but he supported her, even when it felt like they were chasing ghosts. "I don't know," Dana said, her voice low, "but I have to try. This could be it. These mirrors, they're not like anything I've ever seen before." The team, Dana, Luis, and Sarah, the medium, set up their gear inside the remains of the estate. They had heard the stories, the ones about how the mirrors reflected not just faces, but emotions, how each one showed something different. Some said they reflected fear, others said they reflected rage, sorrow, or envy. The last mirror, the 7th, had been locked away. It was said to be the most dangerous, the most powerful. Sarah, the medium, stood silently as she placed her hands over her eyes. Her connection to the spirit world was strong, but Dana had always felt Sarah's gift was more of a curse. "There's something here," Sarah whispered, her voice distant. "Something that doesn't want us to find it." Luis frowned. "You don't think this is just some old house with some broken mirrors, do you?" Sarah shook her head. "No. Whatever happened here, whatever happened to Mary, it's still here, and it's not going to let us leave." The mirrors were set up in a circle, each one reflecting a different angle of the room. Dana stood in front of the first mirror, a small handheld camera recording every movement. The air was thick, heavy, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Dana leaned closer to the mirror, feeling a strange pull toward it. "Mary," she whispered, unsure why she said it. She hadn't intended to speak the name, but it had slipped out. The mirror flickered for a moment, and Dana felt her heartbeat quicken. Her reflection was there, but it wasn't quite right. Her face looked distorted, her eyes dark with an emotion she couldn't place. "Did you see that?" Dana asked, stepping back quickly. Luis was already holding the camera, his eyes glued to the screen. "I saw it," he said, a note of disbelief in his voice. "Your reflection, it changed." Sarah's eyes widened. "It's her," she said softly. "The mirrors are pieces of her soul, fragmented. Each one reflects a part of Mary's broken psyche." Dana turned to Sarah, confused. "Mary's broken psyche? What does that mean?" Sarah closed her eyes again, concentrating. The mirrors, they weren't just made. They were created by Mary's pain. Each mirror reflects a different emotion: fear, rage, sorrow. The last mirror, the 7th one, it's the key. When all the mirrors come together, they'll restore her. "But restore her to what?" Dana asked, her voice shaking. "What does that mean for us?" Sarah hesitated. "It means she's not just a ghost. She's trapped. A spirit fractured by her own suffering. And if all the mirrors come together, she'll be free. Fully." As they moved to the next mirror, things began to spiral out of control. The mirrors didn't just reflect emotions anymore, they fed off them. Luis was the first to feel it. His hands began to shake uncontrollably, his expression twisted in terror as he stared at the reflection in the mirror. I can't stop looking," Luis gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "Luis, snap out of it," Dana shouted, but his eyes were locked, fixed on the mirror, the reflection of his face growing more and more distorted. The mirror flickered again, showing not just Luis but a terrifying image of something behind him. A pale figure, its mouth twisted in a silent scream. "Luis!" Dana shouted, grabbing him and pulling him away from the mirror. He stumbled back, his breathing erratic. "What did you see?" "I saw her. I saw Mary," Luis said, his voice hoarse, his eyes wide with fear. "She's in the mirrors. She's real." Sarah stepped forward, her eyes closed as if listening to something in the air. "We're too late. She's already here. And now, every time we look into one of these mirrors, she's getting stronger." The mirrors began to show different versions of Mary, each one a piece of her. One mirror reflected her anger, her face twisted in rage. Another showed her sorrow, tears streaming down her face, her eyes hollow. A third reflected her envy, her jealousy twisted into a grotesque mask. Each death, each emotion brought her closer to becoming whole. The team began to realize the mirrors weren't just haunted. They were a digital prison, a way to hold Mary, to trap her in the fragments of her emotions. But now, as each mirror was uncovered, the pieces of her soul were coming together, and with each reflection, someone in the team grew weaker. Luis was the first to go. His body began to show signs of disfigurement, his skin growing pale, his eyes sunken as if the reflection had started to consume him. He collapsed in front of the mirrors, his screams echoing through the abandoned estate as he was drawn into the game Mary was playing. Dana, heart racing, knew what had to be done. She and Sarah set out to destroy the mirrors one by one, but with each mirror they shattered. The last one, the seventh, grew stronger. "I won't let her win," Dana said, her voice thick with determination. They reached the seventh mirror, the last one. It was the largest, framed in black iron, covered in strange symbols. Dana could feel the power pulsing from it, the air thick and oppressive. Sarah took a deep breath. "This is it," she said. "If we destroy it, we can trap her forever." But when they shattered the seventh mirror, something unexpected happened. The glass didn't just break, it exploded outward, sending a wave of energy that knocked them both back. And there, in the remnants of the mirror, stood Mary. Her form was fully realized now, no longer just a fragmented reflection. She was alive, her eyes burning with fury. Dana stumbled to her feet, but she knew it was too late. The mirrors had become a gateway, and now Mary was free. As Dana stumbled back into the outside world, the final mirror still burning in her mind, she realized the truth. The mirrors weren't just a prison for Mary. They were a reflection of the pain she had caused. The team had tried to stop her, but the seventh mirror wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Dana's heart pounded as she turned to leave, the shattered pieces of the mirrors scattered behind her. And somewhere, in the distance, Mary's voice echoed in her ears, "I'm free." Story number 9. Haley Storm sat in her old bedroom, the one she hadn't stepped foot in since she was 16. The walls were still painted the same faded shade of blue. The old posters of bands and movies were curling at the edges, and her childhood desk was buried under a mess of old-school papers and broken toys. But the room felt different now. Heavier. She felt the weight of time pressing in on her, reminding her of a past she had tried so hard to forget. Her 18th birthday had come and gone, and now, just like the promise they made when they were kids, the nightmare had returned. It all started years ago, when they were 12. sitting in a circle in the woods behind Tina's house. The night had been full of dares and stupid challenges, but it was the Bloody Mary game that had caught their attention. The myth was simple enough. Stand in front of a mirror, say Bloody Mary 3 times, and she would appear. They had laughed about it, dared each other, but then, in the heat of the moment, they made the pact. They promised to summon Bloody Mary together on their 18th birthday. It was meant to be a joke, a shared thrill, something to look back on and laugh about. But now they were dying. Tina was the first. Her death had been brutal. Her body had been found in her own bathroom. Eyes wide open, blood dripping from her mouth, her reflection twisted in the shattered mirror. The police had said it was some kind of freak accident, but Haley knew better. She knew the pact had something to do with it. She just didn't know how. Then Alex died. It happened just a week later. They found him in his room, face pale, his body slumped against the wall. His reflection, again, twisted and broken. Haley had tried to ignore it, to brush it off as coincidence. But when Jordan died next, his face frozen in terror, his reflection burned into his skin like some kind of permanent mark, Haley couldn't ignore it anymore. The pact was real. They had done something all those years ago that they shouldn't have. And now, it was coming for her. She hadn't believed in Bloody Mary back then, not really. She thought it was just a stupid game, a way for them to test their courage. But with each of her friends dying, Haley began to wonder if they had summoned something darker, something they couldn't control. Now, as the last survivor, Haley found herself alone, haunted by the sounds of her friends' voices echoing in her head, begging for her to do something, to fix it. The fear gripped her. She could feel it creeping in, tightening around her chest. The mirror in her room. She couldn't stop looking at it. It was like it was waiting, the glass reflecting her every move, but something wasn't right. She could see her own face. There, but it wasn't just her face anymore. There was something behind her eyes, something lurking in the reflection. She couldn't run anymore. The phone call from her mother came just as she was packing a bag to leave, to escape the inevitable. But it was too late. Haley, her mother's voice cracked over the line. It's time. You need to face it. You need to end this. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling. There's only one way out, Haley. The pact. It's binding. You need to go into the mirror. You need to face Mary. You have to break the pact, or you'll die too. Haley's heart raced. She had always believed that the supernatural was nonsense, just stories to scare kids. But now, everything she had ignored, everything she had pushed aside, was coming to life in the worst way possible. The thing she had thought was a game was real, and it was closing in on her. Face Mary, Haley repeated, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. But how? You don't have much time. You made a promise. You have to give Mary what she wants. You have to become Mary to stop this. Haley felt like the floor had dropped, out beneath her. What her mother was saying didn't make sense. Become Mary? Before she could say anything more, the line went dead. Her mother was gone. But the mirrors, they weren't. The night of her 18th birthday, Haley stood in front of the mirror. She had no choice. She had to end this. She couldn't live with the guilt of what they had done, of how the pact had killed her friends one by one. She said the words, just as they had when they were kids. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. For a moment, nothing happened. But then, the air in the room thickened. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch, and the glass of the mirror rippled like water. Haley's reflection wavered, and then Mary stepped forward. Her face was pale, her hair wild and tangled, her eyes wide with the kind of grief and anger that could only be born from a life of suffering. But it wasn't just Mary anymore. It was all the emotions they had brought into this pact. The fear, the guilt, the anger. Mary was a broken soul, and now Haley was staring directly into her eyes. "You made the pact," Mary's voice rasped, a whisper that seemed to come from every direction. "Now you must fulfill it. You will take my place." Haley's legs shook beneath her. No, I can't." But the reflection wasn't hers anymore. It was Mary's, her face twisted in agony. But now there was a sense of relief and in her eyes. She had waited so long for someone to take her place. "You must," Mary's voice urged. "I feed on broken promises, on guilt. You are the last one. You promised." And with those words, Haley knew there was no escape. The pact had to be fulfilled. She had to become Mary to break it. The fear coursed through her like a drug, but she couldn't fight it anymore. The choice was clear. Haley stepped forward, feeling the coldness of the mirror, and as her fingers touched the glass, everything around her went black. The next morning, the house was quiet. Haley's mother arrived to find the room empty, the shattered mirror lying on the floor, its shards reflecting the sunlight streaming through the window. But Haley was gone. There was no sign of her. No trace left behind, except for the faint whisper in the air, the same whisper that had followed her all night. "I'm still here." And somewhere in the reflection of the broken mirror, Haley's face smiled back, twisted and distorted. She had taken Mary's place. She was now trapped in the mirror, bound to the pact for eternity. Story number 10. Carter Monroe wasn't the type to follow rules. He had made a name for himself as a travel blogger by seeking out the weird, the unusual, the places most people didn't dare go. So, when he stumbled upon the small town of Grays, Hollow, tucked away in the hills, it didn't take long for him to start poking around. The town had a strange charm, but it was the locals that intrigued him the most. There was one rule, the locals whispered in hushed tones. One rule that everyone followed: no mirrors after midnight. At first, Carter laughed it off. He was used to hearing weird rules from small towns, people who believed in superstition, in myths. But when he heard the same rule from every person he met, each one looking at him with that nervous, knowing look, it started to bug him. "What's the deal with the mirrors?" he had asked the mayor, a thin, tight-lipped man named Mayor Ellison. "It's just how things are done here," Ellison had replied, not offering any more explanation. "Trust me, you'll be better off if you just follow the rule." The townspeople all followed it religiously, even warning Carter several times not to break the rule. But that only made him more curious. So, that night, when the power went out across the town, Carter saw his chance. The wind howled outside, knocking trees against the sides of buildings, and the streetlights flickered and died, plunging the town into darkness. Carter, being the only one without a backup lantern or candle, cursed the power outage. His phone was dead. But there was something in the back of his mind, a question that had been nagging him since his arrival. He knew there was a mirror in his rented room. Just one, a small cracked thing hanging on the wall above the sink. It didn't look like anything special, but Carter's curiosity won out. He had to know. He had to see if it was true. Just after midnight, as the wind rattled the windows and the town fell into eerie silence, Carter stood in front of the mirror. "I'm breaking the rule," he whispered to himself, half laughing, half nervous. He wasn't sure what he expected to happen. Maybe a shadow in the reflection. Maybe something dramatic. But nothing happened. Not at first. Then a faint sound came from behind him. A low whisper, like a voice just out of reach. Carter turned, but the room was empty. His heart started to race. He turned back to the mirror, his eyes searching the dark glass. It wasn't the usual reflection. Something was wrong. His reflection seemed distorted, shifting slightly as though it wasn't quite matching his movements. Then, the reflection smiled, but it wasn't him. Carter's breath caught in his throat. His reflection's smile grew wider, twisted, and its eyes, black, empty, stared back at him with something otherworldly. He stumbled backward, falling to the floor. The reflection in the mirror continued to smile, but then it stepped forward, its hand reaching out toward him. Before Carter could react, the mirror went dark, the glass rippling like water disturbed by a stone. The next morning, Carter awoke to a strange stillness. The power was back on, but there was something off about the town. People were moving slowly, almost as if they were sleepwalking. As he walked through the streets, he realized something was missing. The mirrors. Every building he passed, every house, every store, there were no mirrors. Not a single one. He thought it was just a coincidence at first, but when he asked June, a local girl he had met the day before, she looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. "You broke the rule, didn't you?" June whispered, her voice trembling. "You used the mirror after midnight." Carter's stomach sank. "What do you mean? What's happening?" June shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. People are disappearing. It's happening again." "What do you mean, again?" Carter asked, confused. "What is this? Some kind of prank?" "No," June said, her voice trembling. "It's not a prank. Mary, she's here." "Who's Mary?" June glanced around nervously, lowering her voice. "You don't know? She's the one who started the rule. She's the one who punishes people who break it. She's not a ghost. She's something worse. And when someone forgets the rule, the reflections start disappearing." Carter felt a chill run down his spine. He had broken the rule. And now, something was wrong. The mirrors weren't just missing. They were gone. And now, people were disappearing. It wasn't just a superstition. It was real. As the day went on, the town's strange quiet deepened. More people vanished. Some people who Carter had spoken to the day before, people who had been perfectly fine, just disappeared. It was like they were never there at all. No sign. No trace. Then, at dusk, Carter found himself standing at the town's only remaining mirror, a massive one in the town hall. The reflection in the mirror was distorted, like looking through water again, just like the one in his room. But this time, there was something worse. Mary's reflection stood in the mirror. Her eyes were hollow, her mouth twisted in a sadistic grin. She stepped forward, out of the mirror, her reflection now becoming real. "You've broken the pact," her voice echoed, thin and cruel. "And now you'll join the others." Carter stumbled back, panic flooding his veins. He knew the truth now. This wasn't just a town with a strange superstition. It was under a silent pact with Mary. She had been feeding off broken promises, off fear, for years. The mayor appeared behind him, his face pale and grim. "We've been keeping the pact for generations," Mayor Ellison said, his voice strained. We've sacrificed our reflections, our mirrors, and in return, we stay safe. Mary lets us live. But when one of us breaks the rule, it's all over. Carter's mind was spinning. He had to find a way to fix this, to stop Mary. But how? How could he fix something that had been in place for so long? The town was doomed. That night, as Carter walked through the deserted streets, he remembered something June had said. The pact could only be restored by someone who understood the consequences, someone who could face Mary's wrath. With no other choice, Carter made his way back to the town hall where the last mirror remained. He knew what he had to do. To restore the pact, he had to face Mary and sacrifice himself. When he stood before the mirror once more, he spoke the words that had been whispered for generations. I restore the pact. I return what was broken. For a moment, everything was still. Then, Mary's reflection flickered and her form began to disappear. The glass rippled as her reflection was swallowed into the mirror once again. But the damage had been done. Carter knew he had to stay behind to guard the mirrors, to keep the pact alive. He couldn't leave now. He couldn't let Mary escape again. And so, he stayed. The next day, the town seemed to return to normal. The people who had disappeared were gone, but they were forgotten. The mirrors were back in their places, and the strange rule remained. Carter Monroe had become part of the town's history, its silent guardian locked in the mirror for eternity, watching over the pact that kept the town safe. But at night, when the wind howled and the lights flickered, he could still hear Mary's voice whispering in the reflections. Remember, no mirrors after midnight. If you dare, press play. Share this tale with someone you know will check their mirror tonight. And remember, no mirrors after midnight. Like, comment your favorite Bloody Mary myth, and subscribe for more horror that follows you home.